Hello and welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, with your boy, Jeff Charles, your favorite conservatarian contrarian, where we prefer truth over narrative and principles over politics. And I've got another very special guest for you guys today. This one's going to be really fun, really fun. But before we get into everything, you know what to do. You got to like this video. You got to share this video. You got to subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, because you're just missing a lot in your life if you haven't subscribed to this channel. That way you'll be notified every time I upload a new interview. Also, remember that LibertyNation.com is a proud sponsor of A Fresh Perspective. Check out LibertyNation.com for all of your conservatarian news, original articles, analysis, videos, podcasts, Liberty Nation Radio, and their signature TV program, The Conservative Five, all on LibertyNation.com, where truth is making a comeback. Now then, I'm just going to go right. I'm just going to bring her on right now. I give you the vice chair of the Colorado Republican Party, also a teacher, and also my co-host on the Red and Black Show, Miss Priscilla Rahn. What's going on, sister girl?
Hey, Brother Jeff. How's it going? So good to talk to you again, twice in 1 week. This is amazing.
Exactly. We are both very fortunate.
Yes.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what we talk about this week on Red and Black. But yeah, we're having a really good time.
Such a fun time.
Yeah. So before we get into everything, why don't you kind of tell us about yourself? Who is Priscilla Rahn?
So I am the proud daughter of an Army veteran. My father is Black and he is from South Carolina. He was drafted into the Army at the age of 18, and he is a war hero. He served in Vietnam and he retired after almost 30 years of serving our great nation.
Wow.
And I'm also the proud daughter of a Korean immigrant. My mother was born in Seoul, Korea in 1938, actually, when there was still a unified Korea.
Okay.
She came to the U.S. and started taking martial arts classes in the U.S. And 2 years ago, at the age of 81, she was inducted into the Korean Martial Arts Masters Hall of Fame. So when you have a mother and father like that, you kind of grow up in a very strict household. And I love my parents, and I'm the youngest of 6 siblings, and I'm a teacher in Denver and very active in my community. I serve on a lot of boards, and I'm just really thrilled to help be a part of the change that's coming this November. And so that's kind of the cliff notes. I'm a wife too, and a stepmom. I should mention that my husband's amazing. He's Canadian. So we just have a fun life doing a lot of music.
Nice. Now, did your mom teach you any moves, or?
I keep that secret. So if I have to, pull out my jujitsu moves, people don't see it coming.
Okay, so just remind me never to piss you off.
Right.
I mean, that's really why. That's the only reason I'm asking.
That's the main thing to remember. Yeah.
So you do music. Now, I just learned that you play the keys. You play for your church?
Yeah, I'm a volunteer pianist at my church, Crossroads Church in Parker, Colorado. It's amazing. We have 3 services and we're televised. So if you want to catch us online, visit crossroads.com/live stream. We do a lot of contemporary music, so it's a lot of fun.
Nice. Yeah. See, but it's not as good as if I were there, because I'd probably be heckling you the whole time.
I would tune you out for sure. I'm very, very focused in the Lord when I'm on the platform. So.
Yeah, it's something that you learn. I used to play for worship bands too. So I mean, yeah, when I was younger, I started doing it in high school. Actually, I would play the keys like you, and then I transitioned to guitar and then bass, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. I enjoy it.
We should have a battle of the keys. Just throw out a name of a song and see who can play it best.
You'll win.
30-second rounds.
I played the keys again for the first time in over a decade about a month ago. I am so rusty. You will win that battle easily. You won't even have to try. I will be so bad.
Hey, as long as you're making a joyful noise, it's all good.
Exactly. And I will, my goal is to get my chops back, because I used to be pretty good. I was pretty good, but you use it or you lose it. So
you can do it, Jeff.
Yeah, definitely. Now, tell me about your political journey. I mean, how did that evolve over the years? Have you always been a conservative, or were you one of, us people who were Democrats and then went Republican, or what?
No, I think I've always been a conservative. My father, serving in the military and serving our country, was always patriotic. So he's the one who taught me how to stand for the pledge and to love my country. But he's also the one who taught me how to fight. And I say I do that every single day as a conservative educator in a liberal ecosystem called public education. And, he would always have talk radio on, which is why I love hanging with you guys every week, because we just talk about the issues. But my dad would just have talk radio on. And when you listen to talk radio hosts, they teach you how to question things, and they teach you how to listen to many, many perspectives, when they teach you how to debate and argue. And I also grew up in a Christian household. So I think the combination of the patriotism and growing up just learning about God's word just made me have my values rooted in conservative values. And I call myself a Frederick Douglass Republican.
Okay.
I believe in the life empowering values of Frederick Douglass. And my father, as a Black man, did not raise me to be a victim. He always taught me that I was smart and capable of making my own decisions. And I just learned along the way that I was independent minded and should be held responsible for my own decisions, and that I was capable and very, very self-motivated. And, being, growing up in an Asian household, you kind of learn too that you have high expectations. And so I think just my entire ecosystem in my life, I was always a conservative. And then when it came time to register to vote, it was a natural thing for me to register as a Republican.
Gotcha. See, I mean, when I was younger, I would vote Democrat, but I never considered myself a leftist. I didn't really know much about politics anyway, but I mean, I just figured out to vote Democrat. It was around the George W. Bush era. People didn't like George W. Bush, the whole war thing. It was cool to hate on George W. Bush. Still is and should be. But for me, it's like I never considered myself to be on the left like that. Like, I mean, there was a lot about Democrats that turned me off, and that eventually led to me leaving. But it's funny that you bring up talk radio, because that was instrumental in it. I used to listen to KFI back in California. And I used to listen to Dennis Prager, and people can say whatever they want about Dennis Prager. I've criticized him too, but that man is largely responsible for making me realize that I'm more of a conservative than anything else. And my beliefs have evolved since then, and I've gone more libertarian, but I'm still, more of a conservative libertarian type. But him and, Michael Medved and Hugh Hewitt, I used to listen to them every day, especially when I had a job where I would drive all the time. They were on, and I would find myself arguing with them, but I never disliked them. And one of the things that turned me off to the left was the fact that, back to, this isn't true anymore, but it used to be true that there used to be a saying, Republicans think that Democrats are wrong. Democrats think that Republicans are evil. Now, that's not the case anymore, because, I mean, you look at our political discourse, everybody thinks the other side is evil. So that's not the case anymore. But the hate is what really turned me off from the Democratic Party. You're calling everybody racist. And I'm like, okay, I don't agree with Republicans, but they're not all racist. I mean, it was ridiculous. And also the overall message that because I'm a Black man, my skin color is going to keep me from achieving my goals. Even though I believe that racism exists and even has an impact, I was never taught that it is an insurmountable obstacle to where I shouldn't do what I need to do to get to where I want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the older you get and you take more time to read platforms and to pay attention to legislation and policy, then you start to see, wait, which political ideology aligns more with my own personal values. And a lot of people, when you ask them, like, what are your personal values, they have a very difficult time articulating really succinctly in order to, because they'll say, well, it depends on the issue, which is fine, but you have to know what your core values are and which party, because there are distinctions. A lot of people try to say, oh, well, they're just, two-headed coin, right? But no, there is a distinct difference between what each party platform is and what they're rooted in. Now we're talking, if that's different from when you go higher up in the rankings of politics and how things are done politically, but still at the core of what you believe, you know, when it comes to religious freedom and the Constitution and the right to life and these types of issues, you have to know where you stand, and then you're going to have to make a decision, because even though there are many parties, there really still are only two parties.
Yes.
You have to make a decision, and you have to go with the party that's going to stand up for our constitutional values. And for me, I came to the conclusion that it was the Republican Party.
So, I mean, so you figured out that you're a Republican, so you started voting Republican, I'm assuming. But what made you take that next step and start getting involved in the party?
I was actually encouraged by a former chair of the Colorado Republican Party. I had reached out to the chair as a teacher because I was involved in the teachers union, and I was very involved in lobbying for public education and policies, but I wasn't really happy with what I saw, because as an educator who's a Christian and a conservative, I could see where there were loopholes. So I reached out to the head of the Republican Party to say, hey, could I just talk with you about what I'm seeing and some of my frustrations and roadblocks with policy? So we sat down and we had a conversation, and from there, the relationship just kind of grew. And then one day I said, you know, I'm realizing that a lot of these policies are coming from the federal government on down. And I think I want to try to get involved in policy in the teachers union at a more federal level. And he said, well, why don't you think about running for CU regent? And I didn't know what a regent was at the time. And Colorado is one of only 4 states that elects their board of regents. Most states, they're appointed. And so it was the first time I ran for public office, and I had to learn about, this is stuff we were never taught,
Right.
about civics and, you know, caucus and assembly. And it was fascinating and exhilarating. I made it through assembly, and then I ran my first public primary, and I didn't win my primary. So, but I said, you know what, I'm really determined to help other Republicans get elected. So I spent that whole summer and early fall until November of 2020, knocking doors and canvassing for every Republican candidate that needed me to help them. And after that, I said, you know what, I'm not going away. I'm going to stay involved. And that's when the commissioner in my county appointed me to be on the planning commission. And then my mentor said, you should run for state party vice chair. So these were things that were not really on my radar, but the people around me realized and appreciated my activism. And they kind of said, you know, we're going to take you under our wing, and we're going to help you be a bigger part of the message. And so that's kind of a long-winded story about what propelled me. I was never going to run for any kind of public office, but I guess it kind of found me, and everybody's journey is different. But here I am, you know.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, I admire anybody who's willing to take that step to run for office. I mean, I've had a few friends who have. I had a friend back in Austin, conservative, and she ran for Austin City Council and won. And she wasn't supposed to, but she did, because Austin is still run by commies. So, but I'm very proud of her, and she's doing a lot of good things. But I couldn't do it myself, because I value my ability to say whatever the hell I want. And when you're abroad, unless you're Trump, you can't do that.
I mean, unless you're a self-made millionaire and billionaire, you like Elon, you can say whatever you want. But there are definitely consequences to the words that you say. And I have learned to be more measured and to edit the things that I say, because I am passionate about things. And I am a mama bear when it comes to certain things like children and the elderly and veterans. Those are things that are hot button issues for me that I don't tolerate a lot of shenanigans. So, but it does teach you how to bring solutions. People just want to hear what you're going to do, and then they want to see you do it. And that's really the skill set that you need as a candidate to run for office.
That's true. Now you mentioned the activism that you were involved in. And I was just talking to somebody else about the idea of activism. And when we look at the political climate that we have right now, Democrats and progressives very good at activism. Like they are top notch. Like they're activists. Like they're great. I have to give it to them. The right has always seemed to struggle when it comes to activism. I mean, like I was saying, if I were to ask you to list off 3 left-wing activists right now, you'd probably be able to do it. It probably wouldn't be that difficult because, I mean, they're prominent and they're out there. But on the right, I mean, when I've tried, I mean, I think, Scott Pressler, I mean, and then other than him, it's like, who are the other conservative activists? And I'm not saying they don't exist because they most certainly do. But as far as ones that get out there and that are prominent or that are doing the things that Scott Pressler is doing, we have typically lacked that. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that when it comes to activism, the left outperforms the right?
Well, I think that's simple because we believe in leaving people alone. And, it's not our job to control as conservatives and Republicans what you do and what you say. We're not going to create a bunch of laws that are going to create bureaucracy. We're not going to sit here and raise taxes so we can formulate more programs. We think you should have more money in your pocket so you can spend the money the way you want to. We think that you should have more freedom, not force. And so that's why you don't see Republicans out there pushing and activating for no reason. We just kind of feel like, like you mentioned, you're a little bit of you're an independent leaning, right leaning independent. And so we just tend to be like, you know what? It's America, the land of the free. And you should be able to live your life and pursue happiness without interference from someone else. And so that's the reason why you don't see as many quote unquote Republican activists out there.
Mm-hmm. And that does make sense. But when I look back, I'm like thinking, that's kind of a mistake to do that because we see what the left has done and how far they've gone. I mean, and we're going to talk about this in a second, but we see what's going on in education in your field. That stuff was going on before. And the only reason people are outraged really is because of COVID-19. I mean, that was kind of the silver lining of that whole thing when parents started seeing what was going on in those classes. Now you see more people on the right being involved in activism, pushing back against this stuff. And I think we do need more activism, not to, impose our will, but at the same time, if we want to stop the left and if we want to actually have conservative solutions, we gotta advocate for them. And
absolutely, no, I agree with you 100% that's what we're seeing, that we have an exorbitant amount of groups, mom groups, think tanks that are out there and doing research and have their data and have their talking points, and they know exactly what's going on. So nothing's going to get past us in this election in November 2022. We already are on top of everything that's happening. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that it stays that way. And honestly, I want to see more Scott Presslers. Like I always tell them, like, we need to figure out a way to clone you, or if you could raise up more people like you, we need that. We need people out there registering voters, getting the message out. I mean, even for candidates. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with Jalen Johnson, but he won in a 70% black district as a conservative candidate. Now he didn't go with the Republican banner, but they knew that he was a conservative and that's the way he leaned. But he got out there. He was registering voters. He was on the ground talking to people. I'm excited about what I'm seeing because I think that we're finally starting to get it. And so when I see Scott Pressler at gas stations registering voters, we didn't do stuff like that before because honestly, one of the flaws of the conservative movement is that we don't come up with ideas. We don't come up with innovative ways to get our message out there. We're so stuffy, we're so stodgy. But I'm seeing that changing. I'm seeing a conservative movement that has more of a personality than it did in the past. Because before it was people with bow ties, professorial. No, that ain't going to cut it. Like we need this change that we're going through right now. Is that what you're saying too, or?
Absolutely. With platforms like ours, where as Black conservatives who are just talking and bridging that gap between our community and the conservative ideas, this is definitely the time. We have so many groups. We have log cabin Republicans. We have the Asian Republicans. We have Black Republicans. We have women's and mom groups. We have all of the. So here's the thing. It's like, you can't look at someone and tell whether they're a Democrat or Republican. Sure. Because those days are over. And so when people people can't assume where we are. And we know, you and I know, and every Black person that we talk to, most of them admit, yeah, I grew up in a conservative household. Like, I believe that father should be in the home. I believe that we want our children to have a great education and to have choice. So these are things that we can align on. And I know we've been typically really good at responding to the things that are not good, but you're right. We are now at a place this year, finally, where it feels like, hey, we've got a better grip on what needs to happen. Can you hear Zoe barking? I don't know if you can hear. Okay, good.
If she has something to say, though, I mean,
I think she can hear me talking, and then,
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I mean, I forgot what I was gonna say.
Sorry.
That's okay. I'm getting old. I mean, but I am seeing a paradigm. So, that's what I was going to ask you. Like you mentioned, like log cabin Republicans, Asian Republicans, Black Republicans, or conservatives, or whatever you want to call them. So let me ask you this, because there's always a debate about identity politics. Should we be using it? Should we not? Or what? I mean, I'm sure you've heard people say, oh, you shouldn't identify as Black, identify as American or whatever. And you probably know how I feel about that. But when it comes to identity politics and specifically, what do you think about how it should play out on the right? Or if you think we should just get rid of it altogether, or if it's okay to do it, or somewhere in between? Like, what do you think?
Well, it depends on why we need to talk about or highlight our intersectionalities. What does it mean for me to be a woman? I can't define what a woman is, by the way. Why is that important?
You're not a biologist. No, you can't. I don't know who you think you are. Where's your biology degree?
Yeah. So, the Constitution gave us rights. The Constitution gave Blacks the right to vote and women the right to vote. And so when we're talking about what true equity is, that's why I feel like it's appropriate for us to talk about these things, because we are the party of equity. I feel like we're the party of freedom for all, and we stand behind these things. And so, yes, we as conservatives and Republicans acknowledge our history. And this is the misnomer from the left, that we want to hide our history. We don't want to admit the wrongs of our country. That's a lie. Of course, we're okay with talking about it. And I'm okay with showing all the receipts of how the left, codified a lot of racist laws and policies that we've had to fight to overturn. And so when we're talking about what's fair and what's right, I think it's appropriate to talk about these things, because we definitely don't want to go backwards. We definitely want to move forwards, and we want to make sure that we're treating people in a humane, godly, and equitable way. And so whereas I don't want a job because I'm a Black woman,
right.
don't want to be, I don't want things to be assumed about me from people who may not have had a lot of interaction with people that are different from them. And so that's a fine line between, hey, give me a fair shot, versus hire me because you need to meet a quota, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. I mean, and when I'm going back and forth with conservatives, they're like, "Oh, I don't like identity politics." I'm like, first off, yes, you do. You just don't know that you do. If you cheer for the fact that there's such thing as Black voices for Trump or Latino voices for Trump, then you like identity politics. You just don't like the way the left does it, and I'm on board with that, because I don't like the way the left uses identity politics. Like you just mentioned, you want to be hired based on your merit more than your race or more than your gender, or whatever. And so I think it's okay to have certain messages for certain groups of people, because different groups of people, we all want the same thing, but we don't necessarily have all the same issues, right? So like you're not going to go out to a rural town as a politician and say, I'm going to tamp down on crime. Well, chances are there's not a lot of crime there, because there's, nobody lives there. But no, I'm kidding. I love my rural listeners. I love my rural people. I love you. But no, seriously, but you're not going to go and address an issue that they're not dealing with. You're going to address what they're dealing with, as you're going to meet them where they're at. And so I think that I'm seeing that change too. And it's funny, because over the past few years, I've been very hard on the conservative movement, very hard on the Republican Party. I'll continue to be, but like over the past few months, there's been a lot that I'm seeing, a lot of trends that I'm seeing that's making me cautiously optimistic. And I don't know what to make of it because I'm still expecting the bus to come out of somewhere. Like, oh no, this isn't really going to last. So I'm like, no, I think there's some fundamental changes that are happening on the right, and they're good changes. So I'm getting like, you're more excited than I am because I'm always cynical, but I know you're seeing some of the same stuff.
Oh, yeah. I mean, had I not been in this position, I would have never met you and would never have been able to have these conversations on a wider scale. So there's definitely space for all of these subgroups, because there will be people you'll be able to reach that I can't, and there'll be people I can reach that maybe you can't. And that's just how it goes when it comes to culture. And, you know, we know that culture is a wide range of things. Like, I love music, and so maybe I might be a part of a music group, or I love to play tennis, so I might be a part of a tennis group. So, you know, all of these little subgroups, they're normal. It's a normal thing that people do, and race does bring people together. Culture brings people together, and if that means that we can come together in a way that we can talk about issues that are important to our community, and then join hand in hand and support candidates that are going to support our way of life, that's a beautiful thing. So yes, there's definitely an appropriate way to talk about identity when it comes to general public policy.
So let me ask you this, and this one might be a little sticky, it might be a little bit tricky, but you brought the Log Cabin Republicans. And for those who don't know, the Log Cabin Republicans is an LGBTQ group of that are Republicans that are conservatives, but they're members of the LGBTQ community. They've been around for decades. And, you know, I actually met the person who leads the Log Cabin Republicans in Texas, because there was a big controversy there, because at one of the Republican state conventions, they were supposed to get a booth, and they've never allowed them to have a booth, the Log Cabin Republicans. So that's been an issue. So there are those of us who want a bigger tent on the right in the conservative movement. There are some that don't, because they think that their values don't align with ours. What do you think about that issue? I mean, do you think that we should be more inclusive of members of the LGBTQ community, or do you think, or how do you think we should navigate that?
Well, first of all, I think we should treat every single person with dignity and humanity and fairness. And regardless of what an adult chooses to do, we're in America, that's their personal choice. And I know that people don't agree with that, and that's perfectly fine. That's okay. But at the end of the day, we as a Republican Party are obligated to treat the LGBTQ community with dignity and respect. And treat them just like any other human being. And, you know, every Log Cabin Republican that I speak to, and I'm very close to our chairman here and members of Log Cabin, and they are standing up for many, many great issues. I mean, they are standing up against talking to kindergarten through third grade children about sexual issues. And they've been at the forefront saying, we don't want anything to do with this. We have worked for decades to separate ourselves from this negative and false narrative that we're all like pedophiles. And now we're being sucked into this narrative that just because you're gay, it means that you know, are inappropriate with minor children. And that could be further from the truth. So I think we just need to be thoughtful about how we go forward. And I know that our party has strong Christians who believe what they believe. And I'm not going to be the one to disagree with them about what they believe. I mean, again, we're back to freedom. So we have to figure out as a party how we're going to stand as a party on our platform around these issues. And I think it just comes down to decency and dignity.
I think so. Honestly, and this will be a tangent, but I'm not going to digress on this, but that's really how the church should be treating members of the LGBTQ community as well. And it hasn't always done that. But I digress.
Listen, I'm going to quote a scripture.
Okay.
If I say I love Jesus, but I hate my brother, I am a liar. That is a quote. Okay. So my fruit as a Christian is to love others. And if I don't show that love, I'm a hypocrite and I'm a liar. Okay. So yes, I'm supposed to stand up for righteousness. And that's a big statement to stand up for righteousness, but I'm also to love and to love everybody as best as I can. And that's really hard as people in our flesh, but then I have to work hard to get out of the way and allow God to love through me and to love people that are not very nice. That's not, I'm not saying the LGBTQ community is not nice.
No, in general, just in general. Yeah.
Not nice.
Yeah.
Because I get some nasty emails and stuff and Twitter trolls.
I know you do. I know you do. See, and here's where I stand. I mean, I think, when people push back on this, to me, it's like, you're confusing the Republican Party or the conservative movement with church. This isn't church.
Correct.
This is a political movement designed to influence policy and, get the government out of the way or whatever. So to me, if somebody can stand shoulder to shoulder with me, for limited government, making the government as small as possible, personal freedoms, the Constitution, I honestly don't care what you do in your bedroom. Now, my personal opinions might not be in line with what you think is right. We might disagree on that, but I don't care. I'm still going to support you. I'm not, I still think that you should be welcome into the movement because that's really what we're here to fight for. And so to me, it's like I can separate those things. I don't have to agree with somebody on everything. Do they believe in the fundamentals? It's like even within the church, I mean, you have a lot of different doctrines, but to me it's like, well, okay, but where do you stand on Jesus Christ? Do you accept him as your savior? Okay, then we can disagree on this other stuff, but that fundamental feature has to be there, right? Mm-hmm. So to me, I think that we're coming around to that. I think we've been coming around to that. And the same thing goes with other religions. Like, like there was a time where they didn't want Muslims in the party or whatever, or they were leery about that. I'm like, no, if you can stand up for individual freedom, small government, I don't care what you believe about religion. Now, as on a personal side, as a Christian, yeah, we can have those conversations or whatever, because we're supposed to evangelize and all that stuff. But as far as politically, I don't care. So I am seeing a good trend there too. I mean, there's still people pushing back, but I think more people are becoming, dare I say it, more libertarian on this stuff.
Yeah, no, I see that too. And people are just becoming more aware that we just need to be kind to each other. We're just missing that kindness, decency, and humanity because we're all created in God's image and he loves us. And, there's something bigger than what we see here on earth. And that's, our relationship with Jesus. And this is me personally and what's to come, like what's after this life. And I think that's what's most important.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I want to talk about education, but before we get into that, just want to remind everybody to head on over to libertynation.com when you're in the mood to read some conservative news or conservatarian news. As a matter of fact, libertynation.com has right-wing views from the whole gamut. I mean, you got your libertarians, even anarchists, traditional Republicans, and you're going to get all of the news with none of the spin and all the nuance. And you guys know me, I love that nuance. I like to go deeper. And at libertynation.com, you will go deeper. So check out libertynation.com where truth is making a comeback. All right. So let's talk about all the stuff that's going on right now, because we've been talking about it and everybody's talking about it. And we've got, the critical race theory issue. We've got sexual orientation, gender identity. What's your take on this overall debate? How do you think it's going?
Well, I think the conversation is very welcome, and I'm really happy that a lot of people are talking about public education, school choice, and the future, and looking at data and coming with, some lawmakers are coming with really great solutions to try to reverse the damage that has been done. Now, I'm going into my third decade. This is my 28th year that I've been in public education. I've been a principal. I've been a teacher evaluator. I've worked in higher ed at CCU here in Colorado. And I've seen a lot in almost 30 years in education, and it's not good. And I know that a lot of people who are not in the education system may not be aware at the depth of the issues that we're seeing. And now with COVID, it has been exacerbated when we're looking at suicide rates and social emotional issues. And it's so bad. The discipline situations that we have. Kids are fighting, they're cursing out teachers, teachers are quitting in mass amounts. We can't get sub. So there is definitely a crisis in public education, and it's been a slow boil of the frog. And I've seen it, and I have been a part of professional development where I have been compelled to speak and say things that I don't agree with in order to keep my job. And so when, I think a lot of people on the left are doubtful or skeptical or simply don't believe that a lot of things that they're hearing are happening in our schools, and they're wondering why parents and community people are fighting so hard against certain ideologies. It's because it's true. And there's just so many examples and so many stories of the things that are happening that have caused damage. And all it takes is for you to go volunteer in a public school, in a city school, to see it for yourself firsthand. And then you'll understand how bad it is. And we are at a point where we have got to turn this ship around, or else we're going to lose in 10 years where these fourth graders are going to be voting for the president, and we've got them going into the workforce. We're going to be in big, big trouble with finding kids who even have the capacity to, stay in a job, because they're falling apart at school. Basically, any little bit of stress, they break down into tears because it's quote unquote too much for them. And so there's just so many examples, and I'm just glad, and I would encourage parents to continue doing core requests and finding out what books are in the library and finding out what curriculum's being taught, and going down to the Capitol and looking at the bills that are being passed and supporting bills like the one in Florida. There is no situation, and people are trying to tell me there are situations where it's okay to talk to a 5-year-old about sex or sexual activity. There's no way, and I will say that over and over again. Keep your hands off our babies. And if you want to talk to someone about intimate issues, you can talk to an adult about that, but not to children.
So I want to ask about something that you just said, because there's some other questions that I have, but you mentioned students not being able to handle certain things or breaking down. Can you tell me more about that? Like, why is that happening?
Well, the workload has been so light the past 2 years. They've been home, or teachers have been making a lot of accommodations for children and passing children with very, very minimal work. So now that we're back at school, and see, we as teachers, we're still held to the same accountability for rigorous education. So when we're evaluated and we have to show evidence of student growth, and so we say, okay, here's all the work that I've given students, and here are their grades, and here's the rubric, and here's the accountability. But students, they will just shut down. They'll just shut down, and they're not going to. A lot of kids are skipping classes because the consequences are very, very minimal. We can't force a child to go to class when they're skipping. We can't force a child to sit down and open their book and do work. I can't force a student into my music class to pick up their instrument and play. So if they're not playing an instrument in my classroom, they're failing. Or if I say, hey, I think you've got potential, why don't I put you in this honor orchestra or honor band? And they, sit down with the music one time and they're like, this is too hard. I can't do it. I don't want to do this. So these are the kinds of things that we're seeing where kids don't want to put themselves out there. They don't want any stress. If they feel like it's too difficult or they have to work, they would rather not do it.
Wow. It's just, what I'm noticing is that and I can, in this case, I can kind of understand, because COVID did jack everything up and made everything different. So, but I've just been noticing, just in general, the next generation is very, I hate to say it, but they're soft, mentally soft. And I think that's a lot of what they're learning in school is contributing to that, or like the idea that you're supposed to be shielded from ideas that contradict your own. And when that happens, and it carries on into college, because people self-censor and, they only want certain ideas out there. So that I understand why a lot of younger people don't care about free speech, because they think that speech is violence. And I'm just seeing a lot of that happening. So I was wondering if that was contributing to it, but it sounds like that's not the issue. But in general, I still think that's what's happening. But I wanted to ask you, with all this problematic teaching, like whether it's critical race theory or whatever, I'm kind of trying to not use it because we get more fixated on the term than on what's actually going on in these classrooms. But when it comes to these progressive ideas on race, they've been going on for a while. I even remember reading about it and writing about it before, even before 2017. When did you first start noticing it in your career as an educator?
I would say I started noticing these conversations at least about 20 years ago. 20 years ago in professional development, where they would do the line. Okay, so everybody start on this line and like take one step forward if you can't find a Band-Aid that's the same color as your skin. Take a step forward if you can't find a foundation that's the same color as your skin. Like they would do this, and then at the end of the questions, you would see who was back and who was forward. And of course, all the colored folks were in the back and all the white folks were forward. Mm-hmm. Who doesn't have to worry about going into a store and being followed? Those were the questions that started happening but remember, it was in the 70s when critical race theory was starting to take hold in our law schools. And then it started bleeding into not just higher ed, but public education. Now, not to say that, I never noticed or paid attention that a Band-Aid was tan colored until someone made me notice that I couldn't find a skin, a Band-Aid that was the same, and so now I'm thinking like, why should I care about the color of a Band-Aid? You're making me care about something that, as my grandfather would call, majoring in the minors. Like this is such a little issue that we can now create a narrative and create angst within me. And then now every time I'm walking to a store, I'm like, is someone following me because, I'm brown or whatever? Like, did my dad just get pulled over because he's a black man? No, he got pulled over because he was like going over the speed limit, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why I get really, really irritated, because I wasn't raised to feel insecure in my own body. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing that and where we have students, Black students, who, if a white teacher says, hey, take your hoodie off, put your cell phone away, get your book out, and where's your homework? And this Black student says, oh, you're a racist. Because they learned to use that as a weapon rather than be held accountable. And so we in the Black community, as parents, we have got to start changing that narrative. We've got to stop just accusing every situation we see because of racism. No, we have to take care of our business. That's what we need to do. And if we take care of our business, I think a lot of the problems that we're seeing in our community would be alleviated.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, and it's just interesting that they're already taught to say everything is racist. I mean, it's just, and I'm not surprised, because that is what's encouraged. And even with a lot of the teaching, that the schools are teaching them to do this now. So let me ask you this, and I want to stay on the race topic for right now when it comes to education. What do you think is the solution to that? And like, for instance, like we just passed the Stop Woke Act here in Florida. I have another friend who's also a teacher, and she teaches here in Florida. And I'm going to tell you right now, that law is not going to work. And the ones that have been passed in other states, they're already finding ways around that. There are ways that they can use different words for what they're talking about. And Accuracy in Media just put out a report, a conservative organization, where they went undercover and interviewed administrators and teachers, and they were telling them about how they're getting around these laws by just changing the way they're saying things or finessing it a little bit so that they don't get in trouble. So to me, the laws passed at the state level, it'll do a little bit, it'll do some. But my fear from the whole beginning of this, when they first started talking about state level laws, my fear is that conservatives are going to assume that once these laws are passed, the problem is solved. And I was like, no, this will not solve the problem. They'll figure it out. Now, the same can't be said of the laws regarding sexuality and gender identity. That's different, but we'll get to that in a second. But what do you think is really the way to push back and really stop these ridiculous teachings on race from being infused in classrooms with little kids?
Oh, that there's no silver bullet, obviously.
Yeah.
This past weekend, I, along with the Heritage Foundation, hosted a pastors and parents conference where we're empowering them to get back to our roots. Because, I think there's this misnomer that pastors who have a voice in our community feel like they should not get involved in political issues. But it's the perfect place for pastors to talk about traditional values, because when you don't talk about these things, then you allow someone to replace the narrative. And that's what we've seen. So we've got to get back to the basics of pastors saying, hey, these are our core values as believers. And this is what we need to see change in our communities, and equip parents with the tools to say, hey, we've got to make sure that our young people are listening to certain messages. Like when we look at the data of single parent homes, and we know that more Black children are born into single family homes, and what that then develops into: higher suicide, higher crime rate, lower graduation rates, lower socioeconomics. So one of the things that I tell my students, hey, there are 3 basic things you need to do in order to be privileged, okay? Privileged in a way. First, graduate from high school. That's number 1. Number 2, get a job. Number 3, don't have kids before you're married. Statistics show and data shows that if you follow those 3 steps, you have a higher chance of success and being what we call privileged, because you're not going to be in as much poverty, and you're probably going to get a great job. You're probably going to get a degree, and you're probably going to be successful. And so those are the things that we need to do. Our single moms need to stop marrying the government and marry their baby daddy. And we need to, elect politicians who are going to stop incentivizing women to be poor or on minimum wage. That doesn't get anybody out of poverty. It keeps us in a cycle. We need to talk about prosperity and financial literacy. These are the things that we can do immediately and make these changes. And another thing, pull your kids out of schools that are not supporting your kids and making a difference. We need to stand for school choice and build up some momentum and build up some financial support. And that's going to come through our legislature helping, and a lot of states have done this, passing legislation where the money follows the child, instead of going into a system that isn't working. So, that's what I would say. But again, we need parents to go to school board meetings and be involved and volunteer in the schools and see exactly what's being taught and know exactly what information is in the school libraries and things like that.
Yeah, I like that answer, because it depends mostly on the community. And because when I was asking that, I was asking specifically about, what can we do with the government to stop this stuff from being taught? And there are answers for that. But I like how you led with parents. Parents, regardless of what they're being taught in school, need to be teaching their kids the right thing. The community needs to be emphasizing these values. Pastors, you brought up pastors, those are community leaders, especially in Black communities. And they need to be taking that step up too, to inculcate these values, so that even if they are being fed garbage in their schools, they're still getting the right teaching. They're still getting the right wisdom that their teachers can't or won't give them. But I think that this has to be solved locally. Parents getting involved in their school board meetings. If school board members know that they will be voted out if they support this stuff, that's what's really going to stop it. I mean, the governors can only do so much. I mean, I'm not knocking them, but at the same time, it's not fair to expect Ron DeSantis to be able to solve this problem in Florida, because he can't. He tries, but he can't. He just can't do it. It's got to be done at the local level. I think that we need to transition from focusing on the federal government and focus more on state and local, because that's really what's affecting things. So
absolutely.
Now, when it comes to like sexual orientation and gender identity, this is where I do think laws at the state level will help. Again, it won't solve the problem, but like the parental rights and education bill is going to do way more to stop a lot of these teachings than the Stop Woke Act will do to solve the racial teachings, simply because there is no way around that. Like, you're either instructing 7-year-olds on sexual orientation or you're not. I mean, there's no way to really do that in a way that people aren't going to say, no, that's the wrong thing to do. So when it comes to that, I'm good with it. Now, for the people pushing back against it, against the laws, what do you think is their actual motivation?
I think they're afraid that if a young child self-identifies in the LGBTQ community, that if teachers don't teach tolerance at an early age, that they might have a very difficult time in the public education setting. That's my guess. I haven't been told that, but I think as a teacher, I can see that being an argument if I were to argue what they might think, because, what we are trying to do as teachers is raise humanitarian people who care about people and who are anti-racist and anti-bigoted and all of these things. We don't want kids to grow up and leave at 18 years old having all of these biases. We want them to learn how to live in community and treat people with dignity. And so I think in their mind, they feel like the earlier we can talk about these issues and make them normal, then it will then eliminate them from being, hateful and hate crimes, right? I can understand that, because what are phobias, right? There. If you haven't had enough time, like xenophobia, or are these things like, have you spent time with Asian people? Like, do you know about their culture? And so I always encourage people to not just go to work with someone that looks different from you, but break bread with them, sit down with them, like church with them, go to events. So you get to know people that are different from you. And that's the same with the LGBTQ community. If we're going to be honest and we're going to say, I'm not going to ostracize you, I'm going to treat you like a decent human being. And so how do we learn how to do that? And I think that there's a way to teach children to be kind to one another without talking about sexuality and then confusing them, because I think if it's too young, it's inappropriate. I think there will come a time where children will want to have those conversations, but I do think that parents should be the first source of those conversations. They have a right to build that relationship and trust. And that's another thing that makes me concerned about people pushing back, is that when I hear teachers or adults in the building say, hey, if your parents don't accept you, you can always come talk to me, you can trust me. And they build that trust. Instead of encouraging children to say, hey, do you need help facilitating a conversation with your parents and nurturing that relationship with their parents, they try to become a substitute for the parents. And that's destructive. And, where that child's going to be in that home until they're 18. And if they're in, second or third grade, that's a lot of years to create dissension between a child and their parents, when we should be nurturing that and making sure our kids can read, write, do math, and all of the other core content that they're currently very lowly proficient in.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's where the grooming comes in. And I'm not one to just throw that word around willy-nilly. Like I've said before, I used that word before it was cool. I wrote an article about state-sponsored grooming addressing this stuff. But to me, and again, it's not something that I will just use willy-nilly. At the same time, when you're talking about a situation where you've got young kids and you're trying to talk to them about sexual orientation and trying to take the parent out of the process, I can't think of anything else to call it. Because that's what.
And another point I want to make is that this term grooming is not specifically to any community, and that's not specific to LGBTQ, and it's not specific to heterosexual community or like any community. It's when you're building this trust and you're slowly creating this relationship that's really inappropriate. That's what it is. We've seen it. I mean, for decades, there's predators. You go where it's easy to find your prey, and public schools, I'm sorry, are easy prey for adults to do inappropriate things with. And we're seeing kids, we've had recent stories here in Colorado where high school kids are standing up and walking out because they're being victimized not only by adults, but by their peers. And what is the school district doing about that? And so this is a very, very serious issue. that can't be ignored. And I'm just concerned about any adult who fights me or you or any of us on the fact that they think that there is an appropriate reason to talk to K through third graders about sex or sexual orientation.
Yeah, I mean, and you brought up an important point. This really isn't targeting the LGBTQ community. Like I was saying on another one, I mean, if a female teacher comes into her class and talks about what she did with her husband last night and it's X-rated, those parents are still going to get pissed off and she's going to get sued under this law. So, I mean, it's not targeting any particular sexual orientation, which I think if you were to poll members of the LGBTQ community on this, most of them would agree with that law because it is inappropriate. And to me, what really gets me going about this is, again, the ones who want to take the parents out of the equation. Priscilla, I have been writing a lot of articles on this over the past few weeks. And I normally don't write about education, but I've been writing about it because there are so many stories coming out with districts instructing teachers on how to not let the parents know if a child comes to them and says, hey, I'm struggling with gender, or not, they're not going to say gender dysphoria, but they'll say it in the way that a kid says it. And then the teachers can't tell the parents unless they have the kids' consent. And even then, some of them are even encouraged to lie about it and to deceive while still affirming that this kid needs to socially transition. They're trying to take the role of the parent and trying to do it without the parents knowing. And that's the issue for me. I mean, the parents should be involved. And I'm sure as a teacher, you would even agree with that. I mean, the children do not belong to the state. They belong to their parents. So there's no good reason for them to be hiding this from parents.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so dangerous, because I don't think people realize how easy it is for a teacher to shut their door and teach whatever they want. Teachers can bring in whatever resources they want. They can, they create their own lessons, and nobody would ever know unless a student goes home or says something to somebody else. And definitely superintendents and school board members don't know what's being taught in classrooms. And a lot of times they don't know what professional development content is being taught to teachers. It's just simply out of their radar. And that's why I think it's important for parents to go to board meetings and let them know, hey, this is what teachers are afraid to speak up. I'm going to tell you right now, teachers don't want liability. They don't want the liability of having to do a lesson, a curriculum around sexual orientation. So what if you do it wrong? Like, what if you say something that, I definitely don't want the liability. So I keep my conversations with my students around content, which is music. They try to ask me personal questions, and I say, that's not what we're talking about today, or get your instrument out and let's play music, But
that's exactly what my other friend who was a teacher said. That's exactly what she said.
Not talking to you about any personal stuff. And someone asked me on Twitter, it's like, well, do you think it's okay, if a gay teacher says, like, this is my husband? It's like, of course, if that's your husband, there's nothing wrong with,
that's not instruction. Like the Florida bill says, no instruction. There's a difference between instructing somebody on something and, just mentioning something in passing.
Yeah. And so I think that I hope that people who have fears will go and read the bill. Number one, read the bill, because a lot of people we know are not reading the bill, and they're calling it some funky name that it has nothing to do with. And just think about what their values are when it comes to young children, and what our priorities need to be in public education and private education too.
So let me ask you this, a last question. Now, I know you're excited about November. Obviously we know that Republicans are at the very least going to get the House back. But what do you expect for next year? Well, how do you think the federal political landscape is going to turn out? Because Biden is still in the White House. So what do you think the Republican strategy is going to be, or what do you think it should be?
Well, what I think it should be is border security. I think we need to vet everybody that comes through, because I know, like, Biden administration is trying to attack I can't remember the name of the bill, but we'll revert 42.
Title 42. Yeah.
Yeah. Stuff like that. Like we need to keep Americans safe, and we need to do a better job of this fentanyl issue and the drugs that are coming through. We just lost a young soldier who drowned trying to save two people smuggling drugs into our country. So that would be something that I would hope that we could get a handle on. And number 2 is restructuring how we fund education. I am a proponent and I'm a believer of a strong education system, but I can no longer support a system that has created the disparities that we see. So we have to restructure education and make sure that we are, for lack of a better term, not leaving any child behind. I like the phrase.
Yeah.
But we just haven't been able to, with the capacity or the low capacity that we have to do justice to for our kids. I think we need to take a look at our foreign policy. I've been following very heavily the issues in Ethiopia. You know, we've talked about the issues with Russia and, you know, how are our relations in the world sphere and why are we doing what we're doing? Because in some places we create more damage than we help. And so we need to be really thoughtful about our foreign policy. Voting. I have to talk about voting. A lot of people feel very disenfranchised with the voting system. And I think there's an opportunity for us to take a look at the way we are bringing integrity into our voting system and making people feel like it's secure, one vote per legal citizen.
Yeah.
And I don't care about IDs. Let's show an ID. But you know what? That's not the only issue around our community, because every state has their laws. And I think that it should not be federal laws. I think we should support state laws, because I know there are a lot of politicians who want to take over voting laws and stuff. No. That needs to be kept at the state level. Yes. But so many states have a lot of flexibility in proving who you are. You can put your social security number in, you know, we've got drop boxes, we've got all kinds of, ways. So, I want to see that whole, stereotype of equity around voting, because we can't get an ID. I need all that to go away. And I'd like to get us back to some sanity when it comes to our healthcare. That our healthcare is not fair. It's not affordable to a lot of people. I mean, I can talk about all these issues. There's a lot of issues that I would like to see, but I'm confident to kind of wrap up your question, that Republicans are on the right side and that they're going to bring some stability and reasonableness back into some policies.
Good. I hope that you're right and I'm wrong. I'm trying to be optimistic, but I've seen what they've done in the past. They say all the right things to get into office, and then they get in there and they do nothing. Now, I'm willing to give them a little bit of a reprieve, because again, we don't have the White House yet, but I want some action. I want them to at least try. And the one thing that I will say about Trump is that when he got into office, he started getting stuff done that he said he would do. He didn't accomplish it all, but it was obvious that he was trying. So that's all I want. So hopefully, I think that we are in a different era right now. I'm seeing that happen, and I'm just hoping that I'm not wrong to think that, because this will be the test to see what they do.
That's why right now, as voters, we need to vet the candidates and we need to ask them questions. And then we need to let them know we're putting you on notice that we're going to hold you accountable for these things. Because if you're going to represent us, I don't care if it's local, statewide, or federal, you're going to be accountable to we the people. And these are what if you want our vote. And so let me add this too. Mm-hmm. The Black community needs to stop giving its votes away to people who haven't earned it. Okay. Sure. They need to earn our vote.
Definitely.
They need to deliver. I know you want to say something.
No, I think that's going to, I think that's going, if we continue along this trend, I think that's going to happen, because a lot of Black people are getting pissed off with the Democratic Party. A lot of that doesn't mean they're going to go Republican. They're going to stay home. But I'm seeing the numbers. I'm seeing the polling numbers. There are more Black and brown people who are willing to give Republicans a shot. Not a huge exodus, not showing up in droves for Republicans, but I do believe in this upcoming midterm elections Republicans will get more Black support than they have recently and more Hispanic support. My fear is that they'll get it and then they won't learn the lesson. They won't say, hey, we need to keep doing this. Because a lot of that isn't because of what Republicans are doing. It's because the Democrats suck. Not saying that Republicans aren't doing anything, because I'm seeing some positive steps in that direction. We need to keep that up. I think that there are people within the RNC and within the conservative movement who want to do that. So if they put the effort forth, they will see that they'll reap the results. It ain't going to happen overnight. We're going to take some L's, but we'll also have some wins too. And as they continue to do it, the number of L's will be more, or the number of W's will be more than the number of L's. So,
well, Jeff, I'm excited. I don't know about you, about the number of Black people running for Congress and running for
that too.
I've never seen this many people running. And again, it just speaks to the fact, and as Republicans, they're running as Republicans. The first Black Congress people were Republicans.
Yeah,
so,
and that tells me that they're addressing an issue, because one of the issues with the Republican Party, if a Black person looks at the Republican Party, they don't see themselves represented. Representation matters. Mm-hmm. So when I see all these Black candidates running and even getting a lot of support from the base, maybe not so much from the party, but at least from the base, and I'm seeing them get cheered for it, and I'm seeing Latino women in Texas set to win their primaries and win those seats, that's representation, and that is part of the issue. So that's them working to solve that. So I need that to continue. So I do see that, and I am very happy about it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, because it's a representation, and we're just smashing the negative narrative that we're just a bunch of old white racist men in the Republican Party. It's not true. It's never been true. And so we can stand on our conservative, life empowering values of Frederick Douglass and, turn the ship around. I really believe that.
Yeah, well, let's do it. I'm sure we'll be talking again, but before we head out, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Priscilla Rahn. That's PriscillaRahn. You can go to my website. I try to keep content updated there at PriscillaRahn.com. Those are the main places. And on Red State and Red and Black, share, subscribe, because we don't know what we're going to talk about from week to week, and it's going to be exciting. And we just try to bring you our conservative perspective, and we have fun, and we'd love to have you guys be a part of our journey.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me, Miss Priscilla, and I look forward to doing it again.
Thank you. Me too. Thanks, Jeff.